Welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, December 7th, 2025, and thank you for joining me while I talk to myself about Ohio State's disappointing, frustrating 13-10 loss to the Indiana Hoosiers in the Big Ten championship game last night in Indianapolis. In only his second season at Indiana, which was a perennial Big Ten doormat before his arrival, head coach Curt Cignetti has led the Hoosiers to their first Big Ten title since 1967. Tip your cap to him. That is truly remarkable. Now, the Hoosiers weren't perfect in this game, but they were the tougher team, and they made more plays when it really mattered. Indiana is now the only remaining undefeated team in the FBS. They are the number one seed in the college football playoff and will play the winner of the 8-9 game between Oklahoma and Alabama in the Rose Bowl quarterfinal on January 1st. IU quarterback Fernando Mendoza is likely your Heisman winner. Mendoza finished the evening with a solid stat line of 15 of 23 for 222 yards passing, a touchdown, and a pick. Most Indiana fans would probably tell you it wasn't his best game, but look, he made plays when IU most needed them, including a clutch 33-yard completion to receiver Charlie Becker on 3rd and 6 with 2:26 to play in the game, and Ohio State completely out of timeouts. That throw, for all intents and purposes, sealed the victory for the Hoosiers. Mendoza also hit Becker for a 51-yard completion in the third quarter to set up IU's only touchdown of the game. Becker was huge for the Hoosiers, by the way, last night. He finished with 6 catches for 126 yards receiving. For the Buckeyes, it was a heart-wrenching loss that was, in many ways, including the final score, eerily similar to last season's 13-10 loss to Michigan. Like that game, the Buckeyes squandered several low red zone opportunities in the second half that were, quite frankly, the reason they lost this game. With a minute 34 to play in the third quarter and the Buckeyes trailing 13-10, Julian Sain was stuffed for no gain on 4th and 1 from the IU 5-yard line. Now, it was called a conversion on the field, but upon review, it was ruled that Sain's knee hit the ground before he reached the line to gain, so Indiana took over at their own 5-yard line. And then with 2 minutes and 48 seconds to play in the game, place kicker Jaden Fielding missed a chip shot 27-yard field goal that would have tied the game. Look, the kicking game continues to dog this program. Fielding had 2 devastating misses that cost Ohio State last year's Michigan game, and yet Day elected to bring him back for this season. And now you have to wonder where Fielding fits into Ohio State's plans for the playoff, because he just can't be trusted anymore in high-leverage moments. Fielding's miss came after a 3rd and 1 on which Brian Hartline elected to take both Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate off the field and replace them with tight ends. Julian Sain's pass to reserve tight end Bennett Christian was covered and fell incomplete, leading to Fielding's ill-fated field goal try. It was a curious choice by Brian Hartline, who called an uneven game all night. He just really had no feel at all for the game, I thought. And look, it's reasonable for fans to wonder about Hartline's focus and preparation for this game, given the fact that he's now employed by another school, South Florida, to be their head coach. More on that in a minute. It was a rough night for redshirt freshman quarterback Julian Sain, who for the second week in a row threw an interception on Ohio State's first possession, leading to quick and easy points for the opponent. With 8 minutes and 57 seconds to play in the first quarter, Sain was intercepted by Hoosier safety Lewis Moore on his 3rd pass attempt of the game. Moore returned the ball to the Ohio State 23-yard line. Now credit the Ohio State defense for holding Indiana out of the end zone on that possession. But look, Sain's pick led to a 29-yard field goal that loomed pretty large in a 3-point loss. Sain was also sacked a season-high 5 times in this game. Now, he finished with a respectable stat line of 21 of 29 for 258 yards passing, 1 touchdown and a pick. But I'm sure Sain would tell you that he just didn't make enough plays in high-leverage moments in this game. The Buckeyes finished a dismal 4 of 12 on 3rd down, and as I mentioned, they had 2 trips inside the Indiana 10-yard line that failed to produce any points. They were held scoreless in the second half of a game for the first time since the 2024 loss to Michigan. Look, stats like that are a recipe for a loss every single time in games of these stakes. The Ohio State offense has to be infinitely better than that if they're going to make it back to the national championship game. Jeremiah Smith led all receivers with 8 catches for 144 yards. Carnell Tate chipped in 4 catches for 45 yards. And Ohio State's only touchdown of the game on a 9-yard pass from Julian Sain in the first quarter. Bo Jackson led Ohio State in rushing with 83 yards on 17 carries. I thought maybe he was a little underutilized in this game. Jackson averaged just under 5 yards against an excellent IU rush defense. I would have liked to see a little more of Jackson last night. I thought Ohio State could have been a little bit more balanced offensively between run and pass. The Ohio State defense was uncharacteristically vulnerable to the big play last night. IU running back Kalon Black hit them for a 37-yard run in the first half. And as I mentioned earlier, Fernando Mendoza hit Charlie Becker for 2 huge pass plays of 51 yards and 33 yards in the second half. But on the whole, I thought the Ohio State defense certainly played well enough to win this game. If you hold the opponent to 13 points and 3.5 yards per carry in the run game, you should expect to win, period, full stop. Look, it was a very poor effort in coaching, scheme, and execution on the offensive side of the ball that was largely to blame for the outcome in this game. All is not lost for the Buckeyes, though. They only dropped 1 spot to number 2 in the final CFP rankings and will play the winner of the 7-10 game between Texas A&M and Miami in the Cotton Bowl on December 31st. More on that in a minute. So as I always do on Sundays, I'm going to tick down a short list of observations from this game, but I'm going to save a preview of the Cotton Bowl for a later date when we know who Ohio State's opponent will be in that game. My game ball after last week's win over Michigan went to the Ohio State offensive line, which played far and away its best game of the season against the Wolverines, especially in pass protection. Against Michigan, Julian Sain was not sacked, and he was only pressured 5 times. Little did I know that unit would go on to play its worst game of the season last night against Indiana. Sain was sacked a season-high 5 times for 29 yards by the Hoosier defense. That included back-to-back sacks to kill a promising third quarter drive after the Buckeyes had moved the ball into IU territory to begin the third quarter. It was a rough night for the right side of the offensive line in particular. Right guard Tegra Shabola finished with a dreadful pass blocking grade of 17.6. He allowed a team-high 3 pressures and a sack. Right tackle Phillip Daniels allowed 2 pressures and a sack. Left tackle Austin Saraveld also allowed a sack and finished with his worst overall PFF grade of the season of 58.2. Left guard Luke Montgomery also finished with his worst overall PFF grade of the season of 55.7. Now, this isn't the first time Tegra Shabola has been the catalyst for a poor performance by the Ohio State offensive line. And look, it looked like he was going to be replaced by Josh Padilla earlier this year, but Padilla was injured against Penn State and has not played since. Gabe Van Sickle replaced Shabola last night for 29 snaps and actually finished with a team-high pass blocking grade of 86.5. He also did not allow a pressure. Maybe Van Sickle is the answer at right guard. I'm not sure. Whatever the case, Tyler Bowen needs to spend these next 24 days figuring out the right guard situation because the Buckeyes are going to be facing an excellent defensive front in their quarterfinal game. Texas A&M is tied with Oklahoma for the national lead in sacks with 41, and Miami is right behind them at number 3 nationally with 40 sacks. So the Ohio State offensive line had better get their act together before that game. They have to be infinitely better in pass protection on December 31st than they were against IU last night, or their season could end in Dallas. Last night, 60% of Ohio State's red zone snaps came in either 13 or 14 personnel, which meant one or both of Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate were replaced in the formation by a tight end. I mentioned it earlier. With 2:57 to play, and the Buckeyes trailing by 3 and facing a critical 3rd and 1 from the Indiana 9-yard line, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate were spectators on the sidelines. And that play ended with an incomplete pass to a reserve tight end. And of course, the next play was Jaden Fielding's shanked 27-yard field goal attempt. It made no sense to me because earlier in the game, Carnell Tate scored a touchdown in almost the exact same situation from 9 yards out, only it was 2nd and goal. It just made no earthly sense to take your 2 first-team All-Big Ten receivers, probably the 2 best receivers in the country, off the field and put the moment on a reserve tight end. I mean, no disrespect to Bennett Christian. The play should not have been drawn up for him. In his press availability today, Ryan Day was asked repeatedly about the play calling. Bill Landis asked him who called the plays last night and who will call them in the Cotton Bowl. Day confirmed Brian Hartline called the plays against IU and will continue to call them in the playoff. He also said the play calling is, quote, a group effort. Day later added that he will be more involved in offensive game planning for the Cotton Bowl, which was the same as last year's CFP, which is, good news. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, then you know Brian Hartline accepted the head coaching job at South Florida last week. And there is no way Hartline could have been entirely focused on beating Indiana this week. I'm sorry, you'll just never convince me otherwise. And look, he's not seasoned enough as a play caller to be multitasking for the Buckeyes during a playoff run and South Florida, as their new head coach. And look, the idea behind making Hartline offensive coordinator was to keep him happy so that pipeline of elite receiver talent would continue to come through Columbus. He was never the best, most qualified man for the job. And now that he's leaving anyway, I think it's imperative Ryan Day take over play calling for the postseason. And Day is not the type to throw one of his assistants under the bus. That's just not his style. In fact, he's the opposite of that. He's going to help them save face publicly. So I'm not going to put much stock in what he told Bill Landis today. Personally, I would be stunned if Ryan Day is not the de facto play caller in the Cotton Bowl and beyond. There's just too much at stake to leave that important function to a guy who's still learning on the job and who's going to be leaving the program after the playoff anyway. As I said, the Ohio State defense mostly held up its end of the bargain last night, and there were a couple of bright spots on that side of the ball I want to mention, starting with Sonny Styles, who had a game-high 12 tackles and finished with a team-high PFF tackling grade of 85.4. Styles is putting the finishing touches on a stellar senior season, which is hopefully going to go 3 more games. According to PFF, in 13 games, Styles has not missed a single tackle this season. That is truly remarkable. He is Ohio State's leading tackler with 80. That includes 5 tackles for loss. Styles also has 1 pick, 3 PBUs, and a forced fumble, and he was just named first team All Big Ten this week. It was also another big night for defensive end Caden Curry, who opened the game with a punishing hit on Fernando Mendoza. Mendoza had to leave the game for a play to get his win back. Curry finished the night with 2 more sacks and a tackle for loss. He now has 11 sacks, which ties him with Gabe Akis for the Big Ten lead. Curry was also named first team All Big Ten earlier this week. Now, I was hoping to see a little more in the splash play department from Arvell Reese. Reese was just named the Butkus Fitzgerald Big Ten Linebacker of the Year, but he's been pretty quiet for the last month. According to PFF, only 3 quarterback pressures in his last 5 games. Now, that includes 2 pressures on Fernando Mendoza last night, but he was only credited with 1 tackle last night against the Hoosiers. I guess playing the role of the spy, which, Reese often does, means sacrificing personal stats to make sure an athletic quarterback like Mendoza doesn't kill you in the run game. And look, Mendoza was limited to -3 yards rushing last night. Reese, no doubt, deserves some credit for that. But I'd like to see him get after the quarterback a little bit more in the CFP. It feels like he could be doing a little bit more for this defense when it comes to making plays behind the line of scrimmage and that sort of thing. It's been a tough end to the season for cornerback Jermaine Matthews Jr. According to PFF, Matthews Jr. finished this game with his second worst coverage grade of the season of 47.6. He was beaten one-on-one coverage by Elijah Surratt for IU's only touchdown of the game and by Charlie Becker for that 33-yard reception that effectively sealed the game for the Hoosiers. Matthews was also flagged for PI twice, both against Michigan and Rutgers. Against Rutgers, he received his worst PFF coverage grade of the season of 35.2. So, defensively, if we're looking at areas for improvement, I think there are 2 areas. Matt Patricia needs to get a little bit more playmaking from Arvell Reese, and he needs better overall play from Jermaine Matthews Jr. Teams are starting to pick on Matthews Jr. a little bit in coverage. He's got to be better than what he was last night in the CFP. I admit to being bitterly disappointed by this loss. And look, I know the measure of success has changed with the expanded playoff, but I really wanted a Big Ten championship for this team. Ryan Day has won 11 or more games in each of the last 5 seasons, and yet none of those seasons included a conference championship. This is so weird. Day only has 2 Big Ten championships in his 8 seasons with the program, and those were his first 2 seasons, 2019 and 2020. His last conference championship was 5 years ago in 2020. It's just very strange given all the wins, all the success, that he only has 2 Big Ten championships in his career at Ohio State. At the same time, look, it's hard to stay disappointed for too long when you consider what the Buckeyes have accomplished over the last 12 months. Ohio State followed a national title with a 12-1 regular season and the number 2 seed in the college football playoff. They have 24 days to prepare for a quarterfinal game in the Cotton Bowl. The ultimate prize is still out there for this team, and according to most sports books, the Buckeyes are still the betting favorite to win the national championship. life is still pretty damn good, Buckeye fans. Okay, that's going to do it for me, short and sweet. Miami and Texas A&M will play their first round game in just under 2 weeks on December 20th, so look for a preview of the Cotton Bowl after that game when we know which of those two teams the Buckeyes will face. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks! You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.